So on behalf of the Sociology Department at Brown University, it's my great pleasure to welcome you back, or to welcome you if you're joining us for the first time, to our series of 2 panels on demystifying the graduate school experience. If you were able to join us last time, we had a discussion with Professor Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve that focused on demystifying the graduate experience in general. So we just talked a little bit about what you can expect from graduate school in general, such that with an eye towards helping you make up your mind about whether or not grad school is for you. If you're joining us again, our panel today is specifically about demystifying the application experience. So the format for today's talk is I'm going to be in conversation with 2 faculty members who actually read applications for our program. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the process, how it works, and what we look for in a successful application. So without further ado, I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll go ahead and get started on the discussion. So my name is Josh Basevich. I'm an associate professor of sociology and an occasional reader of graduate school applications in my field. Joining us today is Emily Rauscher, who is a professor in the Sociology Department and faculty affiliate of the Population Research and Training Center, the Annenberg Institute for School Reform, and the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy. Her research focuses on inequality in education, with specific focus on how school funding and other organizational investments improve child well-being and other material outcomes. Emily's work has received support from the Spencer Foundation, the American Educational Research Association, the William T. Grant Foundation, the Gilead Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation, and the National Academy of Education. Emily is currently president of the ASA Sociology of Education section, and she's also director of graduate studies, which means that she oversees the admission process for all graduate students and essentially is responsible for administrating our graduate admissions process in addition to reading applications herself. Our second panelist today is Prudence Carter, who's the Deborah and Joseph Jr. Dowling Professor of Sociology and Director of the Center of the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America at Brown University. Prudence's research focuses on forces behind inequalities in education and society and their potential solutions. Specifically, she examines academic and mobility disparities, how academic and mobility disparities are shaped by the effects of race, ethnicity, class, and gender in the United States and in the global society. She's the author of many, many books, an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, National Academy of Education, Sociological Research Association, the American Educational Research Association. She's also the immediate past president of the American Sociological Association. Like all faculty members at Brown, Prudence also routinely reads applications within her area of expertise during the admissions process. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the first question. And so in terms of format, I have some pre-selected questions that come up regularly during the admissions process from prospective graduate students. So we'll go through those for about 45 minutes. And then after that, feel free to ask questions in the chat. And Professor Gonzalez Van Cleve will curate those and ask them on your behalf. So first question, I guess we can start with you, Emily. Can you take me a little bit through a typical application cycle? Kind of what are the steps at which applications are evaluated? Who reads them? What do they look for?
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I just want to clarify one tiny point. Josh was singing my praises. I am the chair-elect of the Sociology of Education section of the ASA, not the president.
All right. Right.
So I'll be incoming chair, but thank you, Josh, very much for that kind introduction. So to take you through the application process, all applications go through multiple rounds of review. They are first each application is reviewed by 2 faculty members with research interests that relate to the interests of each applicant. And then after those first 2 reviews, all the applications are reviewed by the admissions committee very carefully with the reviews of the first 2 faculty very much in mind. The committee reviews each application a couple of times. The committee then goes back to the whole faculty again for their input before any final decisions are made. So I kind of think of it as an iterative process. So, going through multiple times, making sure that we give a thorough review, a thorough chance to every single applicant. And I know we're going to get more into kind of what we're looking for later, but does that help?
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you a follow-up question that comes up all the time from prospective applicants, which is something along these lines. How do I elect to work with a particular faculty member, and how do I know if that faculty member has accepted me into their research group?
Great question. Yes, that comes up all the
All the
time.
time, right?
And we very much emphasize students coming in to work with potentially many faculty in the department. So we don't want to admit one, an applicant to work with one faculty member. We want many faculty in the department to be able to support each student, kind of like it takes a village mentality to launch each graduate from the program. So applicants do not need to find one particular faculty member who will be their one advisor ahead of, before applying. Those individual relationships are built during graduate school, and we try to find students who will really blossom and grow in our department with guidance and mentoring from multiple faculty.
Right. Yeah, so the key point is we just don't do it that way, right? You're not electing to work with a single faculty member. We're doing kind of holistic admissions, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So then, Prudence, what does that process look like from your end? So you would be one of the faculty who's actually reviewing the applications. Like, what does that look like? Like, what does the actual job of reviewing applications look like?
We receive the full packet as a reviewer, and then each individual faculty member, there is also a rubric that we should mention that the department has developed on a number of key dimensions, and that's around academic qualifications, interest, the extent to which the student's interest might be congruous with the expertise that represented in the faculty, right? Any special qualities or traits that the students may bring. And so there are these factors. I'm not remembering each one of them exactly, but we rate on a scale. And then, so there is a numerical component of it. And then based on each of the evaluators over our read, we write a kind of a summary, a paragraph or so of what we think of the case. And so this is the kind of qualitative information that is actually sent back to the admissions committee. So the question comes like, well, what are we looking for? And I can't speak for all 30 plus faculty, but I can tell you what someone like me who has been teaching for 20 plus years and I have been evaluating graduate applications just as long. The biggest thing that comes to mind for me is I'm looking for who the new generation of sociologists are. What is the sociological imagination that I see leaping off the page, especially from the essay? The essay is a very critical piece for me. After going through the academic part, I mean, we definitely want to make sure, and I want to make sure that we are bringing in students with very strong educational academic qualifications. It doesn't matter whether or not a student has had a concentrated or majored in sociology. You don't have to be a sociologist. I mean, here I am. I just stepped down as the president of the ASA. I was not a sociology major. I took maybe one sociology course as an undergraduate. But the question is whether or not you show signs of deep interest in developing as a sociologist and showing and demonstrating a sociological imagination. So the question then, after the strong academic qualifications in that essay, is there a particular puzzle or inquiry that interests you, right? Are you thinking from a sociological perspective? Can you move, and this is very critical because most applicants are going to share something about their biography, and they're sharing something about their life story. And many of them are quite compelling. Many
Mm-hmm.
people who
Mm-hmm.
apply have had some kind of really kind of, there's probably a pivotal moment or some kind of a very difficult circumstances or a moment of personal resilience or something like that. Those things come through. But in addition,
Mm-hmm.
if you're raising that biography, how do you attach that to a sociological problem, whether it's a larger scale, kind of macro level, all the way down to a kind of a social psychological question? So from the macro to the micro. And that's what I'm looking for. Like, is this a sociologist? Sometimes you're not a sociologist. Sometimes maybe anthropology may be more appropriate, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes actually you might want to be a psychologist or maybe
Yeah.
even an urban historian. And that's, and sometimes you don't know what sociology is. And so I think that is something that I'm looking for, the science of knowing, particularly, or curiosity about the discipline, and then bringing some really creative thought to what you might do in sociology. Then, of course, there are the letters of recommendation. Because this is a very competitive process, we can only take so many. We have a number of students who are applying, hundreds actually, and I think we may be able to accept less than 10%. What others say about your potential is also really, really key to us in terms of
Mm-hmm.
your intellectual acumen, the kind of effort and initiative and drive that you show, and even the kind of work that you've done, whether it's research or whether it's practice or whether it's teaching. Those kinds of things are also very critical. So holistically, it's like, well, what is this portrait that's being created by this package of all of these different parts of the application? And more critically, finally, there are some stunning applications that one comes across, but occasionally we are put, or I would say sometimes we're put into the position, is this person a good fit for our department, given the expertise, the breadth of expertise? And sometimes, every now and then, there are students who are brilliant and who could very well do fine, but we don't have anyone in the department who can meet their interest or their needs. So we have to take that into account as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Emily, I'm going to turn it back over to you. So let me just ask you, kind of finish with the nitty-gritty, and then I'll ask you the same question about like how you evaluate the qualities of applicants, because you also obviously evaluate applications, right? But in terms of how the process works, so all the applications get sort of scored along a couple rubrics, and then there's sort of like qualitative information from the evaluators in terms of like a paragraph about each one of those. How do you get from all of that information to kind of an incoming cohort? Like what are the parameters that we have to consider?
That is a really great question. I think it's much more of an art than any kind of
Right. Right.
algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm gonna summarize it very quickly, it kind of comes down to diamonds who really rise up from really stand out in their area as being the most exciting applicant in that area that fits really well in the department. So we wish we could take 100 applicants, 100 students every cohort. Unfortunately, we're limited by the graduate school in the number that we could take. And so I see it as kind of who are the most stunning, the most compelling applicants in each general area of strength in the department.
Yeah. And I want to pick up also on something that Prudence said that I think is important, is that we have to think about like fit with the department, right? And can we support this person in the graduate program? Like, how do we think about that? How do we make those decisions,
That's a great question. I think I tend to give the student very much the benefit of the doubt. So if they're interested in a very particular area, what some of us might consider a niche area, but
Yeah.
within a broader field where we have a lot of strength, then I see that as a great fit. And often applicants interests change during graduate school.
Mhm.
So they might initially be interested in a very, very small particular topic, but then when they come to graduate school, they learn that this is part of, the topic of migration and health, or
Mhm.
education and stratification. And so we anticipate that a lot of the specific interests will grow and change, but
Yeah.
we kind of focus on the broad interests, and we want to make sure that there is more than one faculty member here who can help to mentor and grow that student's research abilities.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I feel like that's something that I always try to tell applicants is, in some nations, for instance, it's like common to apply to work with a certain faculty member. So you're trying to make yourself super narrow, right? Whereas I think the way we think about it more is, could you work with multiple faculty members such that, like, if a faculty member leaves the department, would there still be a committee that could advise you, kind of thing?
Right. And I don't think our goal, maybe it probably differs nationally, but I don't think our goal here is to create a new Prudence or
Yeah,
a
totally.
new
Josh.
Margot Jackson or John Diamond. We're trying to create each individual star to graduate and go on and change the field in their own new way.
Right. Yeah. Let me ask you really quickly the same question I asked Prudence, and I'll just ask open-endedly. Like, what do you look for when you're reading an application? What are the parts that you pay like more or less attention to? How do you evaluate?
I think, as Prudence said, my first thing is I read the statement of purpose, the statement of
Hmm.
interest, to see who is this applicant, what is driving their interests in graduate school, in sociology in particular, what topic or question are they interested in answering? I want to see, do they, even if they have never taken a sociology class, that's completely fine. I never took a sociology class as an undergrad, but I want to see that they, I guess, kind of like Prudence said, that they're thinking sociologically, that they're asking
Hmm.
sociologically relevant questions, because otherwise this field is probably not going to be a great fit for them. If they come in and they are asking questions that would be better suited to a different field, they're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah.
And being stuck in a field that you don't like for 7 years or 6 years is not fun.
Hmm.
So that's, I guess, number one. I look to see kind of like baseline academic preparation. Will they be able to make it
Hmm.
here? And almost everyone is. It's just the nature of applying to graduate school is, typically good students apply, and then can we support their research interests? And then I take notes on what's really super compelling about this, each particular applicant.
Totally. Yeah. Prudence, let me turn it back over to you. I guess we talked about that already. Let's talk a little bit more about a personal statement. So, um, you spoke a little bit in your opening comments about sort of, what you like to see in a personal statement. Are there particular like examples or, like genres of writing it that you think are more effective than others? Like, if you were advising a prospective applicant on how to write their personal statement, what would you say?
So, you have different degrees of types of writing, and the genre doesn't matter as much as the quality in
Hmm.
terms of how the idea of the concept of the essay is executed for me. And so
Hmm.
there are some who will write about, like elaborating on a research question or a thesis or something that really motivated them or compelled them to apply to graduate school after writing this thesis and realizing there is this question that remains for them. And it's like cultivated or seeds have been germinated for them in terms of and their interest and passion for sociology. That's totally fine. There are others who said, I've just always wondered, based on my observations of life, and what I see in society, how why these social processes or forces happen and what can we do about them. Now, this one is the one that's probably for me the most uh, delicate, and the one that could be the most risky, because some people then write their essay just through their own personal experience,
Yeah.
and they seem to think that that personal experience, it is unique to them. But I say for every one I read about a particular research question, I probably read three applications where people just writing about, well, here's who I am and this is what happened to me in my life at some point. And then the question I want to know, okay, well, how are you attaching that, or how are you understanding that sociologically? Why do you think that would matter to me? Because there's so many, literally hundreds of millions of people in the world, and many people are writing their story, sharing their story. So how do you bring that, not divorce it from you, but connect it to a larger sociological question? And so the ones who can execute that well are the ones that are most effective in my read. And then there are those who actually may tell a story of another, or they may tell a story of a journey. I told this story about how my sociological imagination was cultivated in an English literature course, where I thought I was interested in English. Well, I was an applied mathematics economics major, but I had a very strong liberal arts education. And a professor said to me, wrote in big fat red ink, that I was analyzing narrative text too much from a sociological perspective.
Nice. Yeah.
And so I actually entered with that vignette, right? Talking about what I would read in literature and the kinds of questions that would emerge mostly for me. And I ended up becoming a race, class, gender inequality scholar, is that I was reading this in literature, reading about these social forces, and then interrogating the text around them. And so that's how I ended up. So you can find something, but the most important thing is, I would say, to realize that you have faculty who are reading literally 50 to 60 of these. Each of us has about 50 to 60 we have to read in a course of a few days. Now there are hundreds, but that's in terms of the allocation per faculty. And so we're reading a lot, and we want to make sure that we don't fall asleep. So how actively engage us? So well-written is also important. Make sure you also just do the basics, like, make sure, syntax and grammar and those things are in place in your sentences and subject-verb agreement. But tell a story. And I don't mind writing as if you're talking to the reader. As if you're telling them stories. So storytelling, but not everybody has to do that. I mean, there are some people who can just write very much like they're writing an introduction to a grant proposal or a research question, or have you ever wondered if. So there's so many tactics. I don't want to give a formula for it, just to make sure that it's, one, substantive. It doesn't just stay in your biography, that it reveals a sociological imagination, that you're actually engaging with sociological questions, process, conditions, or what have you, or forces or factors. And that is well written. Those are that come to mind.
Totally. So Emily, same question to you. Pretend I'm a prospective applicant, right? Advise me on how to write my personal statement.
Yeah, this is tough. I found myself agreeing with everything that Prudence said.
Yeah, same.
For me, I want it to do a lot of things. I want it to tell me what types of questions, or what, even if it's just one research question, the student is interested in learning, thinking about, or researching while they're in a PhD program. It could even be a topic, but just something about what they want to do in grad school. Something about why sociology, and that could be, as Prudence said, showing their sociological imagination, which is proof of why sociology, or it could be a personal story, or it could be just that that's what's needed to answer their research question. for me, I think a really compelling thing is to talk about something in their biography or their young personhood that really drove them to sociology.
Yeah.
Something about their background or something that creates this compelling drive and a need to answer the question that or topic that they're interested in studying. I think it's very important that the writing is clear because we're trying to wade through 350 of these. So clear, easy to read, compelling, show
And we're always
enthusiasm.
doing that reading over winter holidays as well,
That's
right?
right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Show enthusiasm for your ideas. What it should not do is show a very clear lack of understanding of what sociology is, or about a lack of understanding of, anything about the department. And it should not have a total lack or absence of any research ideas or topics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll just editorialize. I have to say, I really agree with both of you all. I think, a really nice personal statement has sort of something of a personal story, right? Which like shows why this person is interested in going to grad school, but also does kind of demonstrate that they understand what they're getting into, right? That they understand how to connect that personal biography to a set of research interests and questions, right? So it's like the combination of those two things, I think, are what do it usually for me too. Yeah. Um, sorry, Prudence, were you?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and
Yeah.
say something about if the essay doesn't offer enough, the next place I also look for the imagination is the writing sample.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the writing sample, that's a part of it. That part for me is really key. If I feel that the writing is a little shaky in the essay, then I go to the writing sample to make sure that the person will be coming to graduate school equipped with the kinds of skills, because let's face it, the sociology courses are very, very reading and writing intensive
Yeah.
as well. And so that writing sample becomes really critical as well as a supplement.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Or compliment, rather.
let me ask you a follow-up on that. So what do you think make for effective writing samples? Like what are the kind of things that would work, or that you think have worked well?
Mhm.
What do you look for besides kind of clear writing?
Yeah. Well, the things that are often submitted are papers from classes. If it's
Yeah.
one of the best and most papers that you're proud of, ideally, it's a paper that will take on a social issue that may be germane, something that be germane to sociology. Maybe you haven't taken a sociology course, but if you've taken a social science course of any of sort, that would be really, really helpful, I think. People also oftentimes will submit a piece of their thesis if they've written an undergraduate thesis. We don't need the entire thesis. Maybe there's some part of it. So a chapter is often submitted for the thesis. Some people are writers in general, so they have a portfolio of writing. But once again, I think the writing that's the most useful is that part that is more social scientific for
Yeah.
me in orientation, because we are a social science. But if you're an English major and you're suddenly thinking that you want to go to sociology, you might be like that person who writes that, submits that English paper that's been written from much too of a sociological perspective. And so, it could be that. I remember my writing sample was actually a debate, an intellectual debate between two thinkers of the early 20th century. History, from a history of education course, and they were wrestling around sociological issues. So that was what the writing sample that I submitted for my graduate program.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. Emily, what do you think?
I agree with everything that Prudence said. I think it's very similar to what Prudence said. I see it as any work that shows your best writing skills, where we can see very clear writing that's easily comprehensible, Ideally, it would grapple with a question or a topic, some kind of conflict. For example, Prudence wrote about a debate between two thinkers, or a social science-y paper that lays out a research question and works to address it, or it could be a proposal, a research proposal, where you lay out a research question and talk about how you would go about studying it. So there are lots of different formats that would be fine. We kind of want to see clear writing and how you think in a structured way.
Yeah, yeah. And it's probably the case too that we look at the file holistically at that point, right? So if you're applying to do, you're articulating your interest as doing a certain type of quantitative analysis, it would be nice to get a writing sample that wrestles with data, right? If you're more interested in like social theory as it pertains to education, for instance, it might make sense to include the sort of writing sample that Prudence articulated, for instance, right? Yeah, yeah. What about letters of recommendation then? How should our applicants think about letters of recommendation? Who should they reach out to? What kind of guidance should they give their letter writers? Prudence, do you want to speak on that
Yeah,
first?
I
Yeah.
mean, so it's because you're applying to an academic program and you're applying to a PhD program, we definitely want to see letters from someone who's taught you, because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing is to figure out, to ascertain what kind of student you are. And there are folks who've been away from, who are applying and may have graduated and been away, so maybe a little bit more difficult for them. Then if that is the case, then we need someone who can write about the type of thinker you are, and who can assess your critical thought, critical thinking, writing, completion of task, those kinds of things. I mean, I think that the letters of recommendations that don't work for graduate school are the ones that just say you're a really good person and you've been working there for so many years and you've been a pleasure to work with. That doesn't give us a whole lot a foundation in terms of evaluating your potential as a student, as a scholar, as a thinker, right? As a doer. So there are so character references are important. We want to make sure that we're bringing like upstanding, good folks who can be in community and know how to treat others and be collegial. That's really important. But I think the most important for us is to make sure we can ascertain whether or not, what kind of critical thinker you may be. And so think carefully about whom those persons might be. And ideally, if you're an undergraduate right now applying to graduate school, you want to make sure you can cultivate a relationship or have already cultivated relationships with faculty who can write for you. If it's not a faculty member, well, let's say you've taken a large lecture course and you've done really well in it, or there are a lot of students and the faculty may not know you that well, but a TA may know you, a teaching fellow or teaching assistant, then work carefully with the teaching assistant who can actually work with the professor to either provide the letter, or we would, particularly if they're undergraduates, or the teaching, because that's a pairing where the professor will write the letter in collaboration with your teaching assistant. So that's something that you can do if that's what's happened. And then colleagues, I mean, there are some who get their friends to write letters. We can tell when it's just your good colleague and your friend. It would be ideal if it's actually your supervisor or your boss, someone who else is higher up who evaluates your performance, because it is kind of an evaluation that we're looking for when you've been out in the world. So don't just get your friend to write a letter, because we can actually tell that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that part about the qualitative information is important. I'm just thinking back to files that I've read where, you get a letter of recommendation that basically says this person was in a 300-person lecture course and they got the 7th highest grade on the final exam. And it's like, this is good information. Hopefully it would, though, be reflected in another part of your application. And in some ways, that's a lost opportunity for somebody to tell a story about you, right? Yeah.
Right.
Emily, what do you think on this?
Yeah, I would just add that ideally it would be someone who can talk about your perseverance, your work ethic, how you dealt with a struggle could have been a class, but it could have been something else. So I it does not, all of your letters do not have to be from faculty
Mm-hmm.
or instructors. You could have one from a former professor, and if you've been out of school for a while, two from supervisors in some way, but it would be great if you could encourage them to write about how you learn new skills, how you overcome challenges, and how you persevere in the face of difficulty.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, let's talk about the GRE for a second. So I'm gonna ask this of you first, Emily. Um, should people take the GRE? How important is it, and how do we evaluate it?
So the GRE is not required,
Mhm.
at least this year, where it's not exactly sure where we'll go in the future, but it's not required this year. Best I can tell, so I barely look at it or
Mhm.
barely even consider it. I look to see students' grades for the
Mhm.
most part to see what their academic preparation is. And I don't know what other faculty do, but the we I would say the proportion of applicants who submit GREs is not very high when it
Okay.
is not required. So I guess my advice for applicants would be if you have a high GRE score, absolutely submit it. If you
Mhm.
have a low GRE score, I would not suggest submitting it.
Okay. Okay. So we don't like sort people by GRE or exclude people if their GRE is low or categorically use it in that way. Yeah.
Not at all, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Prudence, what do you think? How do you look at the GRE?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
100%, I agree with Emily in terms of what she just said. I glance at them. I look at
Mm-hmm.
them. I mean, they are an indicator that someone can take a test well, but they're not the most, for me, the biggest indicator is how well you've done in your courses, your coursework. So that
Mm-hmm.
transcript is really, really key because that's about effort. It tells us about the diversity of courses you've taken, what you've been exposed to, even arguably if you've pushed yourself beyond your own comfort zone, like your major, if you stretched yourself. So that's really key to me. And as I said, also for graduate school, because we know, I've literally, because I was an admission officer once before in another,
Okay.
prior to graduate school, I've read thousands of applications, and we've seen that it's not the correlation between actual performance and delivering once in school versus a test score is not exact. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can have high testers who actually don't end up being the best sociologists or the best scholars, but they're good testers. And you have people who are average who can go on and become some of the most extraordinary scholars and thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that, which is why which is why I look at what is being signified in the application, what's been suggested around the imagination, the creativity, the innovation, the effort through those other parts of the application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that's probably the case with most faculty. They sort of look at the GRE and they consider it as part of a whole package. You might look at it if, like, say somebody wants to do quantitative methods, I might look at their math GRE to see,
Yeah.
how it looks, for instance, and compare it against the classes they've taken. But it's not like a sorting mechanism that we use or anything like that.
Yeah, that's
Um, What about language competency? I know in the last panel we got a lot of questions about like how do we evaluate the TOEFL score? How do we, evaluate people for English speaking ability? How do we think about those things?
So this is a requirement by the graduate school,
Okay.
and the department is not really focused on that much at all. I can put in the chat some relevant links. Let me just bring them up here. So this is basically the graduate school has a list of countries where
Mm-hmm.
if you got your degree, I believe the undergrad degree, Students who earned a degree from a non-US university where the primary language of instruction is English,
Mm-hmm.
then they do not have to take a TOEFL. And let's see. I'll just put this word for word in the chat too.
Okay.
Oh, Betsy's adding information also. Thank
Okay,
you,
yeah.
Betsy. So this is kind of a technical requirement by the graduate school, so applicants should pay careful attention to the policy on the graduate school website. And basically, if their undergrad institution is in one of the countries listed as English speaking, then they don't have to submit the TOEFL, but if it isn't, then normally they are required to submit a TOEFL.
Got it.
Or,
Okay.
sorry, or IELTS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
So as part, go ahead, Prudence, sorry.
I just to add just a little bit of contextual matter to that. I mean, it's not, and hopefully that's understood. Why? Because you would hate to have a student who doesn't have facility with English, particularly with reading and writing, to be in our courses and be make themselves vulnerable to not passing the courses. Like, because the lecturers, the faculty will be speaking and teaching, and a lot of the first year of graduate school is heavily theoretical. It can be quite abstract, and the ability to really decipher is so important. So now the TOEFL itself, again, to be fair, those tests, they can be easily manipulated or taken, but a person still not have that facility. So that's why we don't really take it. You know, the graduate school requires certain things, but what's important for us is reading and writing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if you can demonstrate in the application that you can read and write English well, then that is something that's critical, because that's going to actually enhance and enable your success in the program.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any more thoughts along those lines, Emily? What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, what Prince says is a great point. I mean, we definitely don't want to admit students who would really struggle in the classes. Usually that comes out pretty clear in the writing sample and the statement of purpose. So it doesn't usually come down to needing to look at a TOEFL score, for example, but I guess if there were a question, then, you know, reviewers might start to rely on that.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, because what Prudence said is really important. It's a ton of reading and writing in your first year that you have to be prepared to kind of do immediately, which is why. But I think that most faculty, again, try to look at this holistically, right? So I know that when I'm reading, I'll look for, like, is there any evidence here of language competency? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the TOEFL score. If you've done, you know, scholarship in an English-speaking country and sort of excelled, then that demonstrates that, or it can be demonstrated in your letters of recommendation or your writing sample, like, can it kind of appear anywhere, right? Yeah. So I think that's all of our pre-scripted questions or common questions that we get all the time. So at this point, I think I'll welcome Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve back, who will curate the remainder of the questions from the chat.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for these amazing questions. Some of them have been answered by Betsy, and so she's tallied those things over if it was a very specific question. But there was a few questions about the evaluation of professional experience. So the big debate that I hear from students, but also, you know, potential applicants, is they've asked, how will my professional experience, internships, or my work between undergraduate and graduate school impact my application, and how do evaluators think about that experience?
Great question. Who wants to field that?
That is a great question. I mean, honestly, personally, in terms of my own evaluation, I love it when I see people have had some experience beyond university. It doesn't mean that we discriminate, not take anyone straight out of undergraduate, but I think it actually enhances your ability to conceive and conceptualize the world differently and society differently if you've already been out interacting as an adult and working in a professional job, whether as a researcher or practitioner, working in a business, any other domain of society, because you can use that as material, as fodder for experience rather.
Mhm.
For helping to shape your understanding of the world and society. And sometimes that's good material for essays, the basis of the essays as well, and also understanding what you read when you come to graduate school. So there is nothing that I would say that's detrimental about having had some experience beyond undergraduate to apply to graduate school. I took 2 years off before I applied to graduate school myself.
Mhm.
I agree. In fact, I think that it's great if students take time off and work, I'd say, in the real world for a while, because it helps students figure out what their true passion is. And then they come to graduate school ready to pursue that with extra drive, and students know how lucky they are to be in graduate school, I think, often when they come from the working world.
Yeah. And I think like anything else, right? When you're trying to move to a new field, you always have to articulate how your skills or capacities in one field translate into another, right? So in graduate school, what are you going to be doing? You're mostly going to be learning how to ask and answer research questions. So if you've done that in a professional capacity, that is great. But there's also a lot of other things that you're going to be doing. You're going to be teaching. So if you have experience sort of teaching or doing something like that, I think that's a big plus. And then in terms of what it takes to ask and answer research questions, you have to be driven. You have to have a capacity for like independent work. You have to like be able to kind of set your own goals and schedules and work independently, right? So these are all potentially skills that you've acquired in different settings that would be relevant and interesting to us too.
Right.
Absolutely. And I worked for 5 years, so I was old going into, but it was a great time well spent.
Old being late
So
20s,
old,
I
but
guess.
young, young.
Yeah.
So one of the things we talked about in the first panel was kind of the myths, the mythologies about what grad school is. So some mythologies were, I want to go to grad school because I want to be a teacher, or I want to go to grad school because I want to be a policy consultant. So can you all talk a little bit about how does one talk about those kind of goals with a PhD in general that go into your personal statement? And by that, we talked about in the first panel that the goal is really to train you to be a professor or researcher in sociology. But of course, many people, so I see in the Q&A, talk about outside writing, forward-facing publications in the medium, or other types of policy endeavors that they've done. How does the applicant in the personal statement communicate that kind of balance between understanding what a PhD program is, but also having wider ambitions to really affect change in the social world?
That's an excellent question. It's a big question. And it also may be one that we may not agree on because
Hmm.
there are different perspectives on what that is. The reality is all of your faculty and professors have been trained to be scholars. Most of us are, that's what we do. We're training you to become researchers, to become teachers, teachers at the higher ed level, particularly. And many of us do policy relevant work. And we straddle and we may even consult with others in various policy domains. So those are the things that we have strength in and we can convey and impart to our students. Now, if you've already had that and you're applying to graduate school or had some of that and applying to graduate school, I think it's really incumbent to know that once you come to graduate school, it becomes much more theoretical.
Hmm.
It becomes much more structured. And the writing itself, even though, you might think it's drab, it can be dry. There's some real, although in sociology, there's some really excellent writers, including, professors on this call here. So on this Zoom here. But I think it's important to understand that you're actually now becoming biliterate or multiliterate
Hmm.
in your ability to communicate. And the graduate school experience is going to enhance and build your literacy in scholarly work. And that scholarly work, and in some classes, you may be able to then translate that into policy work, right? Or practice work if you're in education, for example. So I think it's a balance, but I wouldn't want anyone to come to graduate school to think, oh, the program is just really going to facilitate my ability to write my blog post or to have my Substack post online, or to write essays all the time, personal essays, because that is not what graduate school is about at all. But hopefully you can do that. If you have multiple currencies in writing, good for you, because many of us don't. And I think that can be an advantage and a benefit, but you will have to be able to adapt to scholarly writing as well.
Absolutely. And that's a great, I think that's just a great advice about the kind of balance and having different hats on, right? Like right now I'm writing for a peer-reviewed journal. I should sound very measured and objective. And right now I'm doing a forward-facing policy report. So many of us are going between those different voices.
Yeah,
so-
and
sorry, go
I
ahead.
think those different roles can be complementary too. Like, so for instance, I always get excited when I come across an application where the person has done any kind of journalism, because you're like, oh my
Yes.
God, this means that the person can write clearly and on a deadline, which means that they're not going to get blocked when they try to write their dissertation, right? Like they know how to write on a schedule. That's a very important skill, right? So it's not just they're complementary, not just separate in a lot of cases, I think.
Right. Or I see that and I think that's a person that can pound the pavement to unearth a really interesting archive that no
Exactly.
one's
Yeah,
ever
yeah.
studied, right?
Yeah.
So there was some questions about statistics, knowledge about quantitative skills, and I have my own feeling about this. I'm not a quantitative scholar. I'm an ethnographer. I do mostly qualitative work, but I'd love to hear the panel. What should applicants, how should they think about quantitative skills, their ability to look at numbers, play with numbers, basically no calculus in the past, those types of things? What training makes a successful applicant, but also a successful graduate student? Let's do both.
I can go first. What I look for in applications is any type of math, statistics, data course, I think very, very big canopy here. So any exposure to data, math, applied math, anything like that, to see can they complete, can they successfully pass that class? And then I also look in their writing sample for any evidence of use of data or how they might apply data. And what I hope to avoid is someone coming in and struggling, but I think very highly of our statistics courses here and our faculty here. And this is often for students, it's a new way of using math and thinking about math. I think it's much more approachable than your typical calculus class, for example. And so I very much give applicants the benefit of the doubt. So.
Yeah, just as I said about writing, I'm going to say this about also understanding data and different types of data. So we require in our department, we're one of the few departments that require students in the first year to take both statistical methods and qualitative methods, which I think is excellent, which all departments should do. Because the reality is, as a sociologist, you're not going to just be a specialist or engaging with people who do work in a similar field. You need to be able to read broadly across the field, which means that you should have at least the basic skills to be able to read quantitative work, or qualitative work. I think quantitative experts need to be able to read qualitative work and be able to actually evaluate it and understand why the arguments are being made. And I think vice versa. those who are more qualitatively oriented cannot be afraid of statistics. So first of all, you have to take it, and you want to be able to pass the courses that are offered. But secondly, you want to be able to read the articles in our journals. And our field is one where there's a diversity. It may have changed a little bit, but it was at one point predominantly statistical. And now it's a little bit more variable, but the methods are changing. And I think you want to be able to be a generalist as well as a specialist as a sociologist, and we see that and understand that as a faculty, which is why we require that you have at least some basic training in both broad camps of methods.
Great. Any other comments on that, Josh? Do you have a?
Nope. That covers
I
it
was
for
going to
me.
say, I think the biggest thing is that if say you're a courts or a punishment or a jails person, and you right in that area, you are going to be asked to review the quantitative work in that area. So you have to be, I mean, if anything, you have to be, you have to know how to do it, but you also have to be discerning to see the errors or problems with certain articles. And, you know, that's such an important skill. It's such an important skill. So there was a couple quick questions. One was about fee waivers. So maybe Emily, do you want to take how does the fee waiver policy work?
That is handled entirely by the graduate school. I'm going to try to find the link. So I'll put it in the chat as soon as I can find it.
Okay, that sounds great. And then there was some anxiety, and it actually made me giggle a little bit. It said, if the person, if you reach out to a faculty member and they didn't respond to you, does that mean you will not get in? And I was like, oh God, did I not respond? Oh no. Can we clear the air?
I'm terrible at it.
I am terrible too. I am, and it is nothing personal. It could literally be Einstein from the grave emailing me, and I missed the emails. So just spell the rumor.
And Josh and I were talking about this earlier, but to be fair, also, suddenly we get an influx of emails because people want to be able to put our names down. And it's hard to maintain and to write back to all of those. I mean, I guess what we could do is come up with a stock answer, but a lot of them are you taking students? Well, so we've answered the question. We don't take individual students as a faculty. That goes through an admissions process. Within admissions, all the faculty read them, then there's an admissions committee, and you're working with a group of faculty. So that's something I wish we could put on an FAQ on our website so that students wouldn't just write us for that. And then the second was, well, can you tell me a little bit about what your research is? Well, that's not very useful either, because Google is a really powerful engine, and so is ChatGPT, and you can see what we're working on. We have bios, we have articles in production, they're in the public sphere. So unless it's a question that's really something that you can't get off the internet, I would encourage you not to send those kind of pat things just to say you touched base. It's not that we're responding because you won't get in. We're often responding because we're so terribly busy, or we didn't see the email, or we're getting so many it's hard to keep up. That's my issue particularly. So I can't speak. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we get a lot of those emails all at once. I always try to star them and I try to respond to each one. I think probably I miss one or two invariably. I think the other key thing to note, though, is that you don't have to talk to us first or reach out to us first in order to articulate an interest in working with us once you get here in the application. So essentially the way that that'll work is the people reading the application are probably not the people you're going to be listing anyway. And the way that they'll evaluate fit and whether or not you could credibly work with that person is based on like overlapping interests, not whether or not you talk to them first. So as a rule, none of us really ever turn students away, at least I don't, right? So if you come here and you're accepted and you're in sort of my area of expertise and you reach out to me about being on a committee or whatever, I'm always going to say yes anyway. So it's not like you need my permission beforehand, right? The assumed answer is yes.
And I just want to piggyback on what Josh said, which is that we are prioritizing students in our program. So we will always give our attention to help nurture and develop students in the program. Which is why we often are a bit strapped and unable to reply to all of the interest from people who are interested in applying. So once you get into the program, we will absolutely, be happy to work with you.
Absolutely. And one other thing, if I could just add, a number of students request, can you meet with me or can I Zoom with you? I mean, there are a couple of things, one time, but two, there are some who come, I think about the fairness of those who don't have access to that or who can't come to campus. There's some who come to campus, will I meet? So I personally reserve my meeting time for students once they've been admitted, because that's a fairer process. It's not fair if some get to meet and say, oh, I have this conversation, can even write about it. Some people write about their experiences of meeting. And so because that can't be, I can't have equality around that, I try to give everyone the same kind of standardize the experience that they're going to have in terms of contact with me personally.
Right. And so there are some questions about the personal statement. So I'll go through some of this is a big picture question that I get a lot of, and I have my own kind of point of view on this. When we talked about personal statements, I guess the question is, how does one balance communicating you want to be a general sociologist on the one hand, but also in some ways think about communicating a type of subfield, right? So I want to be a sociologist and study education sociologically, or I want to be a sociologist and I want to be a demographer, and this is why. How does the applicant balance both the general communication of I want to be a sociologist, but also then balance the specificity of what they may study with a particular mentor? Maybe Emily, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I would focus on the identifying a research question or topic, the kind of the more specific thing, and then you can broaden out from there. But I think what's most compelling is showing that you don't just want to study sociology because it's so broad, it's almost meaningless. So to the extent that you can narrow down in on a question or a topic, that makes a much more compelling application for me.
Great.
And because we're sociologists, study everything that has to do with society, right? All things society. It doesn't help us. We definitely, I would agree with Emily about that you want to focus in on some specific questions or areas or domains. And it's okay to say, here are the broad things. Here are the questions, the general questions I'm interested in. I don't know exactly what I'm going to study. Until I come to graduate school. You don't have to. I actually would prefer a student not to be so narrow coming in, but just to have a general area of interest and then can focus once they've had a year or two of coursework. Because as we said earlier, your actual interests may change depending on your exposure, what you've read, what's been kind of like resonant with you in your classes and your reading and so that's where a lot of people's imaginations, their questions get a little bit more well-formed. The other thing, though, I think, which I would caution you as you're thinking about it, don't assume because you're interested in it, the question hasn't been answered. I see a lot of essays about things where there's a whole genealogy, an entire like field, and maybe it's because you didn't read about it in your undergraduate that you think those questions haven't been answered. That can be a little tricky to say, well, I want to come into graduate school and do this because no one's done that. It's possible someone has done it unless you've done an exhaustive research on it, or you just may not know. So it's just like, I would like to add to or contribute or think about this alongside these thinkers who have been here, as opposed to saying, I want to do this because I haven't seen this before.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's always kind of a balance.
Yeah.
If you were to have to strike that balance, I think it's generally safer to be a little more specific rather than general, which I think goes back to something that I was saying before, is that, a lot of times when I'm reading applications, the question in the back of my mind is like, does the person understand what they're getting into? And are they sort of equipped to do the thing that they are getting into? And it's important to note that graduate school is not undergraduate school part two, right? So it's not sort of like, I'm really excited about sociology in general, and I'm excited about taking this course about sociology of work, and this one about sociology of race, and this one on methods. I mean, it's great that you're interested in our courses, but ultimately what grad school is about narrowing in on a research question, which does involve like usually engaging with the field more narrowly, which is not that you have to like identify that research question, particularly if you don't identify that research question well in your statement. But I think the statement should evince some understanding that that's eventually what you're going to be doing, right? So it doesn't have to be a specific research question, but it should evince like a particular perspective on social life or a narrow interest that you could imagine sort of generating a research agenda. I think that's kind of what you're trying to communicate.
Well, and then let's talk about the second level, which is not just the evaluation of the student and, well, do they have this specific interest, but the idea that by communicating something in the personal statement, they may route their application to, readers or evaluators within that subfield. So, we talked a little bit about quote unquote fit, like, is this brilliant person who is clearly an exceptional budding scholar, are they the quote unquote right fit? So one person had asked, if I mention somebody in the statement of purpose, are they the ones that are going to evaluate my application? How does the student think about the quote unquote signaling mechanism of saying, I really think I'm going to be a sociology of education scholar or a sociology of law scholar? How does that work in filtering the application to the quote unquote right readers?
The way that applications are filtered is based on the categories of interest that they indicate in their application. So the statement of purpose, the text is not analyzed and then it's filtered to reviewers. It's the broad categories of interest that they indicate when they're filling out the application in the system.
Mm-hmm. And it is the case with some of the fields, we have multiple faculty who are experts in those areas. So it could be any number of those, any two of those, perhaps, or 2 to 3 of those. It is a case that every application gets at least 2 sets of eyes, if not 3. Then we, when they're files that we think would be of interest, if we're reading a file or an application and we think, oh, this may be of interest to a colleague and it's not in their repertoire or their pool of applicants to read or review, we'll send it to them. So everybody gets multiple sets of eyes on their application, just so you know. But that we do want to make sure that the people who are at least closest to the fields that you're interested in are getting them.
Right. And I think, to me, it's important too, because if you go through the exercise and you look at the faculty in any department, Brown, Harvard, Michigan, wherever you would decide to apply, if you can't find anyone that might be a good advisor at all, then it may not be a good department for you. And it says nothing about the department. It just says, many departments have strengths or I will say even absences, meaning, there might be one department that really studies organizations really well, but maybe another department that doesn't do that, and they do more international scholarship. So I think that also is a really great way to think about how, like, which departments that you apply to. So we have a question about interdisciplinarity in application. So students that perhaps think maybe they want to work in policy, but also in sociology, how do we evaluate those types of interdisciplinarity in applications? How does the students communicate that? And is there any possible liabilities in that approach?
In the sense of the training to be interdisciplinary, because you, as a graduate student, you can be actually, I mean, the most important thing that for us, as a sociology department, is ensuring that the applicant actually wants to be a sociologist. So the primacy of sociology in the application is key. if the application for me reads like it's more appropriate, let's say, in a department that's like, say, a policy school or an education school where there are multiple or interdisciplinary folks, then that might, and I know some people are applying to both. So I think the thing about it is to be mindful that if you're applying, let's say in my field, I'm a sociologist of education, but I've also been in a school of ed, that you write an application for a school of ed, and it kind of centers educational research. When you're submitting the application to the sociology department, you want to make sure that the sociological questions that are central to your interest are actually illuminated, because otherwise you can get lost as someone who's interested in sociology. So you can be interdisciplinary. Many of us are, in terms of how we do research. But we show first and foremost that we belong in the discipline, that the discipline of sociology is our first home. And that's what we want to make sure, is that you want to be centrally trained here in sociology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's important, you know, depending on the school, I think sometimes they have, you know, certificates in, you know, an adjacent field. So like org studies at Kellogg is like a really, you know, popular thing. But they want to, you know, but the person's like, no, I want to be a sociologist. I do not want to be at a business school. And they make it really clear. I think the clarity in the application is really important. So we have a specific question about international GPAs. And I think we talked a little bit about success in coursework as being really important, you know, over, say, something like the GRE. Can we talk a little bit about how they compare international GPAs with the ones that might happen in the US system? And how do you think of it holistically and interpret it in the evaluation process? Maybe Emily, is that a good one?
So in my experience, the transcripts are very good about providing the range of scores, usually on the back of the transcript. And so it allows reviewers to understand the student's performance in the local, in context, to get a sense of whether this is exceptional, mediocre. That's how I interpret, you know, those grades.
And then we also have,
I worked in international admission for 4 years before going into graduate school, so.
Yeah. And then for some nations, we have faculty who are sort of area specialists in those nations and will often get that application. And so if it's like China or India or Brazil or something, we would probably have a faculty member on staff who kind of understands the status system of the institutions in those places and can sort of give us also more guidance about kind of where the person's coming from.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of questions that were answered that are in the Q&A section that you're seeing right now. So thank you to Betsy, who's, I think, fielded over 50 questions, or she resolved them because many of them were addressed. So just thank you to everyone bringing in all these really wonderful questions. I feel like, do we have time for at least one more? Because I think we're almost winding down. I think we've hit almost all these questions. Is that okay, Josh? Or do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We have another question.
No.
Okay. Well, we have a really great one, perhaps to end with, which is, maybe we can go around in the panelist. This person says, what is the one thing that each of you wish you had known before applying to grad school and a PhD program? That's the first thing. What do you wish you would have known? And also, what's the best advice that you give your students in when they're applying? So maybe we'll go around the table. Maybe Josh, we'll start with you since you've been the moderator. So
I guess if I remember back, I think if I look back, the personal essay that I wrote was like not particularly good, I think, by my own standards. So it was more focused on like my excitement with sociology in general, and wasn't really connected to a research question or a research agenda. So were I to do it over, I would focus it more on kind of like a concrete research interest. But I got in somewhere, so And then in terms of the advice that I give to um, to undergraduates, I guess, I guess one piece of advice I give to undergraduates, and this is hard because it's not something that's easy to make up sort of at the last minute, but it's try to get some research experience, just because that'll help you kind of articulate your research interests. It'll help you produce a good writing sample, but not least, it'll also help you figure out if graduate school is something that you really want to commit to, right? So I think I think, the graduate program here provides good funding. It's a nice intellectual environment, but ultimately what you are doing is you're working on research projects. And I think that that's something that interests some people more than others. And I think it's a good idea to sort of figure out for yourself if that's something that you want to commit 5 or 6 years to before you kind of show up here. So
5 or 6 years in a lifetime, right?
yeah.
Emily, what about you?
I think I did a terrible job of thinking about how my application was going to be thought about and reviewed by reviewers. I was in absolute awe of faculty, and I thought they were like gods on earth, and I had no concept of them as humans. And so I didn't think about the need to show how I would fit with the program and what else? Just like Josh, I think I wrote a terrible personal statement, but so my advice based largely on that is to try to keep in mind that we are human and convey, do your homework. So one thing that you can do last minute is look at the faculty research interests and think about how your interests would fit really well with the program. And that if you write about that, it makes it a lot easier for the reviewers to get even more excited about your application.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Because one anxiety that I'm reading in multiple questions is when they choose the writing sample, is it too long? Is it too, what should it be, et cetera? To that end, should they think about that as they select the quote unquote writing sample? There's a lot of freedom there, but what do you think is the most persuasive choice, if you will, as they select a sample or a paper?
I mean, from my perspective, the most compelling choice would be any kind of social researchy paper to show that they can do it, I guess.
Mhm.
Well, and some may be coming to sociology, though, having not been in social science research, and that does happen. I had a circuitous route. I didn't apply to a PhD program in sociology the first time I was in a doctoral program in sociology and education at a school of education. And I ended up just doing my MA there and applied into a sociology department when I realized that I really, this program was more applied and I wanted more of the theoretical basis in the core of sociology. And so I had to reapply to a doctoral program, and I did that. And the one thing that I realized, having not had any sociology as an undergraduate, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would have actually at least worked on a research project with a faculty member as an undergraduate, or gotten to know a social science professor a lot better and learn more about their work and the work they were doing. I did, because it was the first several years were big growth leaps in terms of really trying to learn the field and its core canon. There are going to be graduate students, if you go to sociology and have never done it, so many who are coming in already with a basis of knowledge, and it's going to feel a bit daunting for you in the first year with the theory, because they've already heard of Weber, Durkheim, and Marx, right? They've already heard of like maybe Stuart Hall, if you're in the race, or Adorno, or they've heard of, you know, Talcott Parsons, or I mean, other people on the, but let me get into or Coleman or whatever the names are, whatever the theorists are, W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, so they've heard of these people, they've read these people. And I think it can be intimidating if you're reading it for the first time. So one of the things that a tip I would give my an undergraduate student who's not a sociology major is to at least read some sociology papers as you're applying to graduate school, particularly if you think you're interested in a specific, you have a specific research area, go and read some papers or a book in that area to the extent you can actually like digest it and really get what it's about, because that'll also really help you understand, is this what I want to do? Is this the work that really interests me? And so if you're applying to graduate school cold and you just think sociology is cool because it is a cool discipline, but you've not done any homework on it, that's going to show for us in the application. So I would encourage, and that's the advice I would give an undergraduate, is that at least read some papers in the area of interest of yours. And particularly if you're going to name call us, read our papers. If you want to work with specific papers, you know, to the extent that time allows, read some of the work of the faculty with whom you think you would like to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny, I remember my first year, somebody said, oh, well, that paper, you know, Howie Becker would really have loved this paper. Why don't you send an email? And I go, what? I was shocked at the idea that I was in direct conversation with another professor. I kind of understood it, but not like that it would actually happen right away. And so I think it's such a wonderful idea, is that you just start reading those papers and see if you want to be in the conversation. Josh, I will hand this back over to you. Thanks for everybody who asked those questions. And thank you for Betsy for really helping to answer as many as possible.
Yeah, and I'll just extend a thank you to our esteemed panelists, including you, Nicole. And also thank you all very much for joining us. Good luck, and we look forward to reading your application soon. Bye.
Bye.